Evolve or die. That's the philosophy that has made the mutant warlord Apocalypse one of the greatest threats to both mankind and mutant kind. Practically immortal and possessing the power to transform his body into a living weapon, Apocalypse's true danger comes from his ruthless philosophy that only the strong should survive. That belief has driven him to try to transform the world into one where the strongest mutants rule, and led him to battle both Professor X's X-Men and Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Apocalypse's story spans millennia and features identical clones, centuries-long naps, and lots of time travel. And we're here to answer the big questions like, how has Apocalypse's brutal philosophy secretly shaped the Marvel Universe over the last 5,000 years? How did this philosophy lead to a disastrous Age of Apocalypse? And what happened to his plans when all mutants were finally united as one people? We're here to answer all those questions and more. This is Marvel Recap Apocalypse, with a special shout out to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe research team for their help. Apocalypse's story started 5,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. That's where the Baal tribe, a warrior clan that embraced the belief that only the strong should survive, discovered a grayish-blue baby that had been abandoned in the desert sands. While some of the tribe felt they should leave it there to die, fearing that it was a demon, their leader saved the baby, declaring that he was destined for greatness. By his 17th birthday, that baby had grown to become a powerful Baal warrior, known as En-Sabah-Nur. But he was soon enslaved by the pharaoh Ramatut, who sent his grand vizier Ozymandias to slaughter the Baal tribe. But what En-Sabah-Nur didn't know was that Ramatut was secretly a time traveler from the year 3000 named Nathaniel Richards, who had become stranded in Egypt years before. After the pharaoh had him tossed into his snake pit and left for dead, En-Sabah-Nur fought his way to freedom. But just as he was about to be slain by the pharaoh's soldiers, Apocalypse's rage unlocked his mutant powers, which apparently granted him super strength and some transformative power over his physical form. He used his mighty power to slay all in his path, declaring himself the pharaoh's Apocalypse. Ramatut fled to the future in his time machine, where one alternate version of himself would become Kang the Conqueror. While Ramatut may have escaped Apocalypse's wrath, he left Ozymandias behind. Apocalypse used Ramatut's advanced technology to turn Ozymandias into living stone, rendering him immortal. But the true punishment came when Ozymandias was exposed to the Eye of Ages, a historical device from the future that downloaded the complete history of humanity into Ozymandias' brain. Overwhelmed by the sheer amount of knowledge, Ozymandias' mind fractured, turning him into Apocalypse's most loyal servant. Apocalypse took over the pharaoh's throne and shaped his warriors into his personal army, which he named Clan Aqaba after the tribe that had abandoned him as a baby. Driven by the desire to have only the strongest warriors, Apocalypse sent his army to battle Alexander the Great's forces. Only the strongest survived, and over time, those warriors would come to be known as Apocalypse's Dark Riders. Eventually, Apocalypse moved Clan Aqaba to the South Pacific, where he ruled a mutant community on the living island of Okara. There, he fell in love with and married a powerful mutant named Genesis, who could control all plant life. They raised 4 children: War, Famine, Pestilence, and Death, who grew up to become the first version of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen. But when the island was invaded by the otherworldly demons of Amenth, Genesis and the horsemen trapped the demons in another dimension, banishing themselves and half the island in the process. Apocalypse wanted to go with Genesis, but after one last farewell kiss, she told him he wasn't strong enough. He needed to stay behind to make the world into something that could stand against their enemies. He needed to see that only the fittest remain. Apocalypse was left behind with the other half of the island, which would eventually become known as Krakoa, the Living Island. Apocalypse dedicated himself to Genesis's task, spending the next several centuries shaping civilizations around the world by impersonating various Egyptian, Aztec, and Indian gods. While traveling the world, he defeated the immortal magician and ruler of Mongolia, Garba Xian, only to discover that his base was actually a mysterious giant spaceship. Apocalypse took the ship for himself. Not long after, he and his Dark Riders were repeatedly attacked by a mysterious warrior known as the Traveler. Over the coming years, Apocalypse's forces battled the Traveler repeatedly, unaware that this was actually the time-traveling mutant Cable, who we'll introduce later on. Thanks for making recaps so complicated, time travel. During one battle, Apocalypse was gravely wounded by a shot to the head. The Dark Riders tried to take the Traveler as their new leader, but he declined. Years later, Ozymandias brought the Traveler to Apocalypse's spaceship, which he recognized as originally belonging to the Celestials, a sect of immensely powerful cosmic beings who judged species across the universe. Inside the ship, Apocalypse was still alive due to him being infected with the Traveler's blood during battle. That blood was infected with a techno-organic virus that transformed Apocalypse's organic flesh into living technology. More on that later, don't worry. When Ozymandias took the dying Apocalypse into the Celestial ship, the techno-organic virus linked Apocalypse to the ship's systems. This granted him vast additional power and a biological armored form that Apocalypse could morph into any shape, weapon, or appearance he could imagine. However, the Traveler used the virus to activate the ship and sent it into space, locking Apocalypse aboard. The immortal mutant spent centuries trying to return home. During this time, Apocalypse began entering into extended hibernations, becoming more powerful upon each awakening. He has maintained this practice throughout his life, using these times to heal from any wounds or damage he may have suffered. Eventually, Apocalypse returned to Earth and reclaimed control of Clan Akaba. He then began to build a new ship, also based on celestial technology, in the shape of a sphinx. While working on it, Apocalypse was contacted by one of the Celestials, who told him that use of their technology came with a cost. He was being offered great power to shape Earth's destiny, but with it came the possibility of great suffering in the future, as the Celestials would return someday to demand something in return. Apocalypse agreed to their terms and used their technology to upgrade his weapons as well as himself. Over the following centuries, Apocalypse continued his plans to dominate the planet. However, his need for greater energy continued to force him to slumber for decades, even centuries at a time. After one of these power naps, he awoke in 1459 Romania, where his Riders of the Dark battled forces of the Transylvanian nobleman Vlad Țepeș Dracula, who would become a recurring adversary. But his most important awakening happened in 1859, just as the British scientist Nathaniel Essex was scandalizing the scientific community with his belief that survival of the fittest could be used to create a superior man. Apocalypse became interested in Essex's work and tasked him with using the techno-organic virus to create a plague that would cull the weak from the strong. To aid in this plan, Apocalypse mutated Essex into a new form, who called himself Mr. Sinister. Apocalypse then tried to conquer the world by assassinating Queen Victoria and taking over the British Empire, but was stopped by the time-traveling X-Men Cyclops and Jean Grey. Wounded, Apocalypse returned to his regeneration chamber, but before he slept, Apocalypse charged Sinister with continuing his work. Apocalypse slept a few decades, until 1897. That's when the descendants of his clan Akaba woke him to deal with his old adversary Vlad Țepeș, who had since become the legendary vampire Dracula. Apocalypse decapitated his foe and returned to London to continue his slumber, but he was only able to snooze until 1899. By then, Sinister had succeeded in replicating the techno-organic virus to aid in Apocalypse's plans for world domination. However, Sinister tried to infect Apocalypse with that virus, which resulted in Apocalypse banishing Sinister from his presence. Terrified, Sinister knew that he would need a more powerful mutant to eventually defeat Apocalypse, so he became obsessed with the genetic potential of the two mutants he'd met when he first became Sinister, Cyclops and Jean Grey. Centuries later, in modern times, Apocalypse was accidentally awakened by the time-traveling Cable, formerly known as the Traveler, who we swear we'll get back to soon. Apocalypse awoke to a very different world than he remembered, one where mutants were now hated and feared, leaving him even further from his goal of ensuring that only the strongest mutants ruled the world. In response, he created a group of mutant terrorists known as the Alliance of Evil and threatened to destroy New York from his celestial ship. He also used his technology to augment the abilities of his new four horsemen: famine, pestilence, war, and death, who he unleashed to conquer the world. When Mutant Team X-Factor, which included Cyclops and Jean Grey as members, came to stop Apocalypse, they were horrified to discover their former teammate Angel at the side of Apocalypse. They'd believed Angel dead when he blew up his plane after his wings had been amputated, but Apocalypse had transformed him into the Horseman Death, giving him new, razor-sharp, metallic wings. He and the other horsemen battled X-Factor until Iceman managed to trick Angel into destroying an ice sculpture of himself. The shock of seemingly killing his friend brought Angel back to his senses. The reunited team defeated Apocalypse, although he was able to escape. X-Factor even started using his celestial ship as their base. Which brings us to one of the most important moments in Apocalypse's long history. Seeking revenge against X-Factor, Apocalypse transformed several Inhumans into his new Dark Riders. They attacked the celestial ship and kidnapped Cyclops' infant son, Nathan Summers, and infected him with the techno-organic virus. In revenge, Cyclops destroyed most of Apocalypse's body with a massive optic blast. Unable to find a way to stop the techno-organic virus from consuming Nathan, Cyclops sent his son into the future to be raised by Clan Ascani, devoted enemies of Apocalypse, as Cyclops hoped they could make good on their promise to cure him. And that baby grew up to become Cable, who, using the name Traveler, would go on to first introduce the techno-organic virus to Apocalypse in the past, meaning that Apocalypse created not only his greatest enemy, but also himself. See? I told you we'd get to Cable. Apocalypse's decision to infect a baby with a deadly virus would prove to be disastrous for him, as we saw in the Executioner's Song storyline. The story began when Professor X was seemingly shot by Cable, although the culprit was actually Cable's mysterious clone, Strife, who had also traveled back from the future. Strife was created by Clan Ascani as a healthy, non-infected copy of baby Nathan, should the child not survive. This clone was ultimately stolen by Apocalypse, who planned to use the clone's immensely powerful mutant body as a host for his own consciousness. After learning of his true origins, Strife developed a hatred for those he blamed for his horrible life, including Cyclops and Apocalypse. To exact his revenge, Strife shot X-Men founder Charles Xavier, Professor X, while impersonating Cable. While the bullet didn't kill the professor, it did infect him with the techno-organic virus. Soon, Apocalypse awoke from his slumber, although he was still weak from Cyclops' vengeful attack. With his Dark Riders, Apocalypse attacked Strife, only to lose the battle and therefore his Dark Riders when Strife recruited them into his Mutant Liberation Front. With nowhere else to turn, Apocalypse fled to the X-Mansion, where his former horseman Angel, now Archangel, wasn't too happy to see him. In exchange for sanctuary, Apocalypse agreed to cure Professor X of the techno-organic virus, and when the X-Men stormed Strife's moonbase, Apocalypse accompanied them and faced his Dark Riders, who grievously wounded their former master. Meanwhile, Cable defeated Strife by sending them both through a time vortex, which swept them uncontrollably into the time stream. Archangel found and mocked Apocalypse, pointing out that he was not fit to survive. Apocalypse agreed, but Archangel refused to give his former master the clean death he begged for, leaving him bleeding and alone. Now, you might be asking, just how bad could a world ruled by Apocalypse's Darwinist philosophy be? No? I'm the only one? Well, that's what we learned in the epic Age of Apocalypse storyline. It all started when Professor X's son, David Haller, aka Legion, traveled back in time to kill Magneto, Xavier's archenemy, whom Legion blamed for keeping Xavier from being a true father to him. Unfortunately, he accidentally killed Professor X, thus creating a timeline where Xavier never worked to improve relations between humans and mutants. That resulted in Apocalypse advancing his plans for world domination, sending his horsemen to capture the nuclear weapons stored at the Cape Citadel army base. but the Horsemen were thwarted by Magneto, who had created his own team of X-Men to honor his fallen friend. Despite the X-Men's efforts, Apocalypse eventually conquered North America, which he split amongst his 4 strongest Horsemen: Nemesis, Sinister, Abyss, and Mikhail. Apocalypse transformed the continent into a brutal regime, where the strongest mutants ruled, while humans and the weakest mutants were held in pens and experimented on by Sinister. The only survivor from the original timeline was the X-Man Bishop, who was an immigrant from a future reality. However, the altered timeline had left him with amnesia. 20 years after Xavier's murder, Magneto and his X-Men rescued Bishop from Apocalypse's forces, and while probing his mind, learned of the proper timeline. Looking to restore history to its proper course, Magneto tasked his team and his allies with finding a way to send Bishop back in time to stop Legion from killing Xavier. But while the X-Men worked to achieve that goal, Apocalypse's forces tracked Magneto to Xavier's old mansion in Westchester County. After a vicious battle, Apocalypse captured Magneto and his infant son, Charles. The X-Men and their allies converged on New York to rescue Magneto, leading to a massive showdown just as the human resistance launched a barrage of nuclear missiles at America. The X-Men successfully sent Bishop into the past to reset the timeline, and Magneto used his powers to rip Apocalypse in half, ending him once and for all. However, some of the inhabitants of that splintered timeline, which came to be known as the Age of Apocalypse, were able to make it to the restored timeline, including Nate Gray, a powerful telekinetic mutant who Sinister had created from the genetic material of Cyclops and Jean Grey. Basically, Nate was that reality's version of Cable, but with fewer shirts. Apocalypse continued his drive to conquer the world by assembling what he dubbed the 12, a group of the most powerful mutants on Earth. However, this was all a trick, as he planned to steal their powers to make himself a living god. After bringing the dozen together in Egypt, he attempted to drain the life out of Nate Gray, but Cyclops sacrificed himself instead. This caused Cyclops and Apocalypse to merge into a single, powerful entity. However, Apocalypse wasn't able to claim victory, as Cyclops fought him from the center of his mind. Unable to wrest control, Apocalypse fled. Apocalypse's minions hunted down Cyclops, who had gained full control of his body and fought to prevent Apocalypse from getting free. And inside the X-Man's mind, Apocalypse's captured Psyche tried to take control of Cyclops' body. Eventually, Jean Grey was able to separate Apocalypse's mind from Scott's, and Cable scattered Apocalypse's essence throughout time and space with his scimitar. While it seemed that Apocalypse had finally been destroyed, his servant Ozymandias used the techno-organic cells and samples of his blood to create a new body for his master, restoring him to life. Surprisingly, En-Sabah Nur's resurrection was aided by his old foe, Cable, in the past and the present. Cable had come to believe that a fully restored Apocalypse would be just what mutant kind needed to make them stronger. Ozymandias advised Apocalypse that mutant kind didn't need a culling to make it stronger. It needed a leader. And with that, Apocalypse returned to his rejuvenation chamber to restore his strength. While Apocalypse slept, the Scarlet Witch, in a bout of madness caused by the loss of her children, cast a spell for no more mutants, which resulted in 90% of all mutants losing their powers. The energy of this decimation event awoke Apocalypse, who found himself in a world where mutants were even less powerful than before. He responded by issuing a message to the remaining mutants. He was their salvation, and his techno-organic blood could restore their mutant powers. To enforce his will, Apocalypse recruited 4 mutants, some of them now powerless, to become his new horsemen. The fiery mutant Sunfire became Famine. The radiation-absorbing Gazer became War. The magnetic Lorna Dane, aka Polaris, became Pestilence. And Remy LeBeau, aka Gambit, became Death. Apocalypse's real plan wasn't to restore mutant kind, but to use a new meta-plague to kill 90% of all humans. He'd then let the survivors battle each other to prove their worth. The X-Men assembled against him, aided by Ozymandias, who decided that Apocalypse had truly gone insane. The X-Men were able to take down Apocalypse's flying Sphinx with the help of the Avengers, and the giant mechs of Sentinel Squad won. Inside the Sphinx, the X-Men battled Apocalypse and his Horsemen. When Sunfire broke free of Apocalypse's conditioning, he helped the X-Men by roasting his former master. Apocalypse tried to blow up the ship as a last act of defiance, but the destruct sequence was damaged by the X-Men, and he was forced to escape through a membrane in space. That hole took En-Sabah-Nur to the Celestials, who said they were finally collecting the debt they'd mentioned thousands of years ago. However, what they called on Apocalypse to do remains unrevealed. While it seemed like Apocalypse was finally gone for good, Apocalypse's followers cloned him into the form of a child. However, that clone was soon killed by the X-Force member Phantom X. To alleviate his guilt, Phantom X used the clone's blood to grow another clone. The clone, known as En-Sabah-Nur, aka Genesis, was raised without knowledge of his template in a micro-reality called the World. Without the brutal life that Apocalypse had endured, Genesis grew up to become a kind and gentle soul, and eventually a heroic student trainee of the X-Men. But Apocalypse wasn't gone for good. His consciousness traveled from the cosmos to a South American island, where his followers had prepared a new host body for him using celestial technology. However, his plan backfired, and his body devolved into the form of a primate, which was caught and experimented on by his followers. Apocalypse was eventually able to possess his fourth test subject's body, which explains that giant D on his chest, and used his powers to restore himself to his classic appearance. Sometime after mutant kind was reborn by the Scarlet Witch and the X-Man Hope Summers using the all-powerful Phoenix Force, Apocalypse's brutal worldview began to slightly soften when all mutants were united as a utopian nation on the living island of Krakoa by Professor Charles Xavier and other mutant leaders. Xavier even encouraged mutants who had used their powers for ill to join him on the living island, including Apocalypse. Wolverine expected trouble, but Apocalypse assured him that while he'd spent centuries fostering war and conflict to spur mutant kind into world domination, Krakoa was what he'd always wanted mutants to become. He was proud, and with that, Apocalypse submitted to Professor Xavier's laws, finally becoming one with the people he'd tried to dominate. Apocalypse was even willing to put aside his differences to take a seat on the Krakoa ruling Quiet Council. But Apocalypse hadn't entirely abandoned his survival of the fittest philosophy. He soon created and presided over the Crucible, a gladiatorial trial where depowered mutants could regain their powers after dying in combat and being resurrected by the Five, an incredibly powerful mutant enclave whose combined abilities could rebirth deceased mutants. When another island appeared near Krakoa, the X-Men discovered it was inhabited by the mysterious being known as the Summoner of Arakko. The two islands soon joined, and Apocalypse greeted the Summoner, who turned out to be the child of his long-lost daughter, War. This led to the X of Swords storyline, where Apocalypse killed several of the powerful mutants known as Externals to create the External Gate. This mystical portal connected Krakoa with Arakko, the other half of the island that had been sealed off centuries ago. That once-lost island was now filled with the descendants of Apocalypse's family and his original mutant community. That included Genesis, Apocalypse's long-lost wife, whom he'd believed dead for millennia. He was reunited with his lost love, but she worried that the centuries on Earth had rendered him soft. Genesis asked Apocalypse to stay with her. He warned her that he had changed and was not the same mutant she left behind long ago, but she had come to respect him and could see who he truly was. And while most of the Arakkan mutants returned to Earth to join Krakoa, Apocalypse decided to remain in the other dimension with his wife, Genesis, and the rest of his family. However, the Arakkan mutants wouldn't stay on Earth for long, as Magneto instituted a plan to send them to Mars so mutants could claim the planet before humans could. Afterwards, Genesis returned to Earth and decided to conquer the Martian settlement, leading to the conflict known as the Genesis War. After losing the war, Genesis exiled herself to Mars's moon, Phobos. Apocalypse returned to Earth and fought alongside the mutants of Krakoa and Arakko against the anti-mutant organization, Orcus. During the battle, he sacrificed the mutant Wrongslide to keep Krakoa alive. The nation of Krakoa fell in the aptly titled Fall of X storyline, and thus the island prepared to permanently leave the Earth for the extra-reality realm known as the White Hot Room. Apocalypse objected, convinced that Krakoa should remain on Earth. He battled the X-Men for control of the Krakoan Council, arguing that all their accomplishments were due to him. After all, who saved Arakko? Who saved Krakoa? Who rekindled the flame of mutant magic? Apocalypse. However, the fight ended when Jean Grey linked Apocalypse's mind with the Krakoan mutants, who had been sent to the White Hot Room to escape the threat of Orcus, unintentionally staying in this realm outside of reality for the equivalent of 15 years. Jean made Apocalypse realize that these mutants were everything Apocalypse could have wished mutantdom to become, but he was too busy fighting to see them as they were. Apocalypse realized that while his brutal methods might have brought mutant kind to this moment, there was no use for them in this new, more peaceful era. Deciding that his methods were outdated, Apocalypse put 12 mutants through a series of deadly tests to find his heir. The winner was Cypher, who was transformed into Revelation by the same celestial technology that transformed Apocalypse. Revelation revealed that he wouldn't use Apocalypse's methods, force and might, to shepherd the mutant race. Apocalypse agreed, saying it would disappoint him greatly if he did. With that, Apocalypse departed Earth for Mars to rejoin his wife and family, having finally realized that his ways were not the only ways to shape mutant kind's destiny. And that is our abridged summary of Apocalypse. Want to learn more? Sign up for Marvel Unlimited, where you can find Apocalypse's many, many appearances. If you're curious, here's the full list of comics referenced in this video. This has been Marvel Recap Apocalypse.